Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Queer Theology podcast. We're talking about sex, baby, again. Just as a reminder, we're getting ready to start our sex positive spirituality class, which is going to kick off this Wednesday. If you're listening to this on the week it comes out, it'll be this Wednesday. You can head on over to queertheology.com/sex positive for all the details and to sign up for this cohort. We would love to have you join us. All right. Let's get into this episode. So we're talking about all of the wonky, ridiculous things that we have heard about sex from church, Sunday school, religious folks, family members. If you have any horror stories of yourself, we would love to hear them. Pop on over to our Instagram and find the post for this episode and share those with us so we can sort of all commiserate together. And then we're going to close this episode just as like a sort of preview where we're going on. Obviously, both Shannon and I have moved beyond from and healed from those horror stories. And so it's like, okay, well, like if you want to sort of like get healed, how do you do that? And then if you feel like you've already gotten healed, like I feel like I am gotten healed. And also I still feel like there's like some more work and some value in continuing to return to my relationship to sexuality, spirituality. So we're going to talk sort of a little bit about sort of how this is an ongoing process and what that might look like for you going forward into the rest of the year and your life beyond that. So, Shay, what is one of the like wonky off the wall messages that you got about sex or desire or your bodies from Christianity, from religion?
Yeah, I remember really specifically, I had a youth pastor that seemed really obsessed with the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye when that came out, and like tried to do a series on that every February for like years. And it was very much in the vein of like, stop trying to make fetch happen, because the youth group even then was like, no, we're not doing this. I think like courting was a bridge too far, right? Like everyone was pretty on board with, wait to have sex until you're married, yada, yada, yada. But like the idea of courting, I think they were like, no. But he still kept really trying to push it. And I remember, that being weird. I mean, because that whole thing is like, you don't really date, you hang out with your parents. It's very much like you're setting up someone to get married when they're like 19.
Yeah.
Right. And like your parents kind of had to sign off on it, and you're never alone until even after you're engaged. It's just a very culty, weird,
Controlling.
And we know that controlling. We know that Josh Harris now has like, quote unquote, repented of making $1 million off of that book and traumatizing teenagers forever. But like, so that was a big one. And then there was also, I think generally like a lot of true love waits, pledge cards, lots of that happening at Christian rock concerts, purity rings, which like often were given to girls on their 16th birthday, that you were supposed to give to your spouse when you married them had you kept yourself pure. Or like if you had sex, you had to like give it back to your parents, which was also, again, like very, very controlling. And then I also remember conversations about like, I remember very vividly, I must have been in high school at Christian summer camp, and some people were doing some kind of sex talk. And they were like, you don't have to have sex before you're married because the parts just fit together, right? Like you don't, like there's nothing to learn. You don't have to learn your body. You don't have to learn anyone else's body. Like these parts are just designed to fit together. So like, it'll just work when you get married.
God.
And like people were laughing, and like it was uproarious. And at the time, knowing like nothing about either bodies or sex, it was like, okay, like I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like insert A into B.
Yeah. But like looking back, that is one of the moments like looking back on that I'm like, oh, we got sold a really shitty bill of goods. And because it was talked about in such strong language, like when sex inevitably doesn't work for you because it's not an insert A into insert B situation, like whether you're straight or queer or like
Yeah.
whomever you are having sex with, like that's not how it works. It like doubly compounds the shame, right? Because you've saved yourself, quote unquote. It's supposed to work. It's supposed to be good. And if it's not, now you're like, what did I do? Like, am I broken? Did I do something wrong? Like, did I lust after someone and ruin myself? Like, so that in particular, I think more than any of the other messages I got was the most damaging because it was it's so insidious, right? And it's so like designed to be shame producing. And then if your sex is bad, like you don't feel like you can talk about that, right? Because it's been so hyped up that like once you get married, sex is going to be awesome. And so like if it's not, what do you do? So yeah, those were the big ones for me.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking at the end there about like sex being so hyped up that then if it's bad, it's like it's your fault or what do you do about that? And I'm just struck by like how sex negative like the loudest parts of Christianity are, while
Yes.
also being so obsessed with sex, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
You just hear about how terrible it is, how you shouldn't be doing it, how it's dangerous, how you're going to get AIDS or pregnant or die, how we shouldn't take any steps to mitigate those things like condoms or birth control or abortion access. Because, like, if bad things happen to you or hard things or challenging things, you deserve it. And then also, but it's like, the pastor's always talking about like the mind-blowing sex he's having with like smoking hot wife, right? Like, and it's just like and like getting married and having kids, like, is such an ideal on the wife, like being virginal until she's married, but then always readily available afterwards, but like not too into it. Otherwise, she's like a Jezebel. Like, it's just like the whole system is like designed to make you feel crazy, right? Like,
yes. Yeah. We interviewed someone who was like, sex is terrible and awful and horrible. Save it for the one you love. Right.
Yeah.
Like as a summing up of the purity culture messages. And I think too, like it, not only does it like really, really, really do a number on women, which has been talked about, like people are writing about, which I think is amazing. I do think that one of the like kind of untalked about things is actually how awful this is for guys too, right? For men,
Yeah.
like what if you don't have a high sex drive as a man? What if you like are not into that in the same way? Like how does that also kind of build on your psyche? And also, I also remember like so many messages about how, you know, growing up presumed female, there were lots of, we mostly got modesty talks, right? Like it is our responsibility to keep men pure. But also I remember hearing at the same time that like anything could turn men on. Like men were not in control of their desires. They were not in control of their emotions. They were not in control. And I even remember like as a young person being like, okay, well, like, are they or aren't they? Like,
Yeah.
Do I need to not wear that because men won't lust? Or like, does it not actually matter because I'm being told to like dress modestly, but also like no matter what I wear, men will lust anyway? So like, are they in control or are they not? And I think that like that kind of notion goes so far beyond sex and is like why Christian masculinity is like really, really fucked. You know, just that's on my mind because my book is coming out soon, but like, you know, thinking about like how these messages really screw up men too. Like none of this is good for anyone of any gender, right? And I think that we just need to keep driving that home.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like building upon what you're saying, it's not good for men or people of any gender, and like the mixed messages that you get. I was talking with a colleague of mine who's also like does sex and relationship therapy at work about, and he has someone that he knows who's going through this divorce because like he was a Christian and he like had multiple affairs with his wife, but also like in the framework, him and his wife understood like masturbation, even without porn, to be a sin and to be infidelity. And so it's like, and they weren't, she like, which is her prerogative. She was like not interested in having like sex with him. So he's like not having any sex and even masturbating without watching porn is a sin and infidelity. it just like then like, well, like no wonder like he has like no moral compass, because like it's all a sin, it's all infidelity. And so he like suppresses it until like he can't, and it explodes. And it's just sort of like it didn't have to be this way. There were like so many different off ramps for you to like find ways to have sex that you both do enjoy. Like maybe that does not involve like PIV. Like explore open relationships, like explore masturbation by yourself so you can have that release. But that it's just sort of like if we do a real disservice when we conflate very like normal, like typical natural desires and expressions with things that are like objectively destructive or bad or betraying, right? And so it's like, and this is like again on purpose, because like you can't suppress all of sex. And so like if I feel constantly bad for like being aroused or wanting to masturbate sometimes, then like I must be this like terrible, shameful person. And if I like can't separate like there are in fact healthy ways to be a sexual person, then like it's really hard, like you just like lose context of like where the line is. It reminds me, I don't know, it reminds me of when I was like when conservative Christians would be like, oh well, like you're gay and that's your like temptation, but like, you know, some people struggle with alcohol, or some people like, I like cheated on my wife. And it's like, well, those are like not the same. Like getting blackout drunk and hurting yourself and cheating on your wife and just like existing as a queer person are like not all actually the same. And so I think this gets back to like, for progressive people of faith, it's not actually about sort of like an anything goes attitude, right? It's about recalibrating your ideas about sex and your body and desire, sexual expression and relationships, so that you can actually live out intentional, faithful, soulful, spirit-filled, like values-aligned ways of having sex. And you like kind of can't get there until you like let go all of the like shame-inducing bullshit that gets like heaped on. But you have to be able to like discern the difference between like this is natural and normal and good versus like this is something that's like hurting myself or hurting someone else.
Yeah, I think that like I just keep thinking about lust and how like
Yeah.
evangelical Christianity defines lust and how that has done such a number on people, and like the inability to parse out like, is it to like be attracted to someone versus like lusting after them, and how so many people still cannot answer that question. And so they just like either are always feeling bad because they're always lusting, quote unquote lusting, or they like, I don't know, it's just
or not feeling bad,
so
or maybe
messy.
they should be, because it's like excusing like creepy behaviors, because it's like
yeah, like there is a way to like look at someone and be attracted without lusting after them, without being creepy, without like crossing a line. There's a lot of people that don't know how to do that.
Because I know I've been on the receiving end of people who like send me unsolicited nudes, send me like specifically like I'm thinking of someone like who I used to go to church with, and I was like, I like don't want that type of relationship with you. Like, please don't send me like dick pics or whole pics. And like he would stop for a while and then they would like start again. And I was like, I've asked you not to do this. And he's like, sorry, I just get like, you know, I've like worked so hard to like undo shame and like really embrace sex positivity that I just like, sorry, I got so excited. And I'm like, no, you like sending me a whole pic after I've specifically asked you not to is like not actually sex positivity. Like that is like some like fucked up bullshit. And so finally I was like, listen, I'm going to be really, really clear. If you do this again, I am going to block you on all platforms on my number. Like this, I want to be like very clear. Like you cannot send me a picture of your genitals or of your butt. And like 3 months later, he did it again. And I was like, babe, like you got to learn. Like this is not it.
Yeah, and I think that story is also like really illustrative of why it's so important to do this work, and like why it's so important to like really invest in unlearning and divesting from the messages that we got growing up. But then it's not enough to just be like, oh yeah, like I have gotten rid of shame, or I don't believe that anymore. Like you said, like now anything goes, because it's like, no, that's going to also lead you to places that feel unhealthy and gross, or that like weird other people out, or whatever. Like there's a way to embody your own sexuality without shame, while also like being in good relationships with other people. And I think that is really important. And I don't want to speak over, I don't want to like overgeneralize, but it does feel like a lot of queer folks who grew up in very conservative traditions have like not done the work to not be creepy, right? Like I've just had too many encounters with folks that I'm like you think you're being flattering and kind, or like, I don't know, making me feel attractive, but like you're actually just making me feel really uncomfortable, and this is not good behavior, and like it crosses a line, right? But I think it's very specifically because they haven't done the values based, right? Like they've gotten over the shame maybe, but like now they haven't actually taken the next step to get healthy and to figure out like what that looks like.
Yeah. And of course, all of this is sort of like the nuts and bolts of this is what we're going to be going into in our sex positive spirituality cohort, which again, queertheology.com/sex positive.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of these sort of like negative experiences, like a few years ago, I've had like really positive ones too, where like I was at a naked party at this gay bar in Queens where I used to live. So it's not a sex party, but we were just like all like queer men in our nakedness in just like sneakers. And this guy came up and he was like, "Hey, are you Brian from Queer Theology?" And I was like, "Sure am." And then we had this like whole lovely conversation about queerness and spirituality and like nakedness and shame and bodies and like being this like sort of communal space and like how it felt liberatory and lovely. And it was like very friendly and like very appropriate, and like wasn't like we happened to be naked, and that's why we're even like, oh yep, look, we're like totally naked talking about God in this gay bar. But it was like lovely because there was like neither one of us were like pushing boundaries or touching each other or like making assumptions or like sexualizing like what was just by being naked, like a fairly like non-sexual space, right? And so like you don't like, it's not that we have to be like prude or buttoned up. Like you can still be open and adventurous. It's being able to sort of like figure out how to know yourself and like your values, and also like what you're comfortable with or not, what you're not comfortable with, like, and then also how to be able to like interact with other people and discern from them what they're interested in and like what they're comfortable with, so that you can like meet people where they're at and have experiences that are like fun and fulfilling and like flattering even, but that are actually like sex positive and values aligned, so that you can like know like when can I compliment, or how do I compliment someone in a way that is not creepy, and when is it like appropriate to like not make those remarks. That's all part of the work of like figuring out like sex positivity from a values based place.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that both you and I have learned, and not just around like sex and sexuality or even bodies, really like all of our kind of faith life of diving into scripture and stories and text and justice work and etc., is that like you don't just figure all this out once and then you're done. Like this work kind of iterates and continues, right? I know for me, I kind of keep having to go back to things and figure out like, oh, well, that was my values and that worked for me in this particular setting, but like I'm different now. I've grown, I've changed, I've shifted, my world has changed, like I'm in a different place. Like what are my boundaries now? Like what does that look like? And you know, from everything from like navigating how I use social media to like figuring out sex and relationships, like all of that kind of shifts and changes. And so I think there's also an encouragement to folks to like keep doing this work and keep going back to it. Like even if you've done it before, even if you've like think you have a pretty good grasp on what your values are, it's like important and helpful to revisit that, you know, even like once a year to say like, okay, now I'm a year into this. Like, what worked? What didn't? What do I want to change? How might my values shift? And again, this isn't a saying that like you're shifting values means you're, I don't know, changing your mind or wishy-washy or like watering things down. It's just acknowledging that things change. Like you change and you grow, and what you want and need is different depending on where you are in your life. Like revisiting is really vital.
Yeah, I feel like when I first started doing this work of like releasing shame and then figuring out like what my like values aligned sexual ethic was, in the beginning I felt like I was kind of like swinging more because I was like, it's not this, like maybe it's this, it's okay, it's like not quite that. And I like was sort of like I had a lot more trial and error, right? And so I was like bumping into things that like weren't working or didn't feel good, or like I just like met new people along the way and I had my mind open. And so like maybe a belief that I had about the way that sex, bodies, relationships like are or should be, then like got expanded. And so I like adapted that. And so now, like 18 years after coming out, I feel like I bumped into a lot of the walls and I've done sort of like the swerving and overcorrecting and recorrecting and kind of coming back. You can't see me, but I'm sort of like making these hand gestures of like back and forth, right? And so like the swings are now much less intense. And I'm just sort of like making like tweaks and alignments. And also like, just because like my values feel very consistent from like year to year to year to year now, like I feel quite settled in those, like my interests might change year to year or month to month or week to week. Like what I want to try out or focus on or emphasize, my priorities might shift, right? Some of that is just because like I'm getting older, or like, oh, I've like checked those boxes. And so like now I want to try something else, or I'm realizing that I have some like longing of and this is not just sex wise, like career wise or creative wise or relationship wise or life adventure wise or sex wise, like that I like am realizing I've been like, I keep coming back to like, maybe maybe it is worth investigating that. Like for me, it was like moving to California. I just was like, for 10 years, I was like, I want to move to California, and I just kept putting it off. So eventually I did it, right? And now I've done it. I'm like, great, check. And I like left California. And so like, it could be that for your sex life and types of sex you want to have. But it also could just be like that you are in like just sort of like getting more clear on sort of like what you want. And so the process of returning to it is like not necessarily expecting your values to change 180 month to month or year to year, but just with like a continually like checking in with yourself and like what feels good, what are my priorities, am I living in alignment with this, and are there any sort of like tweaks to my values or to how I'm living out those values that I want to make in the days, weeks, months, years ahead.
Okay, so I have two questions for you, kind of as we bring this home.
Yeah.
Someone's listening and they're still like, oof, I got a lot of stuff that I'm still carrying around from growing up, right? Sex negativity, shame, etc. What is like the first thing they could or should do to start to unpack?
Yeah. I mean, so there's like a self-guided answer and there's a get some support answer. I think like a great tool, which you and I constantly sing the praises of, is like just get a journal, right? Just start putting that down in there. We have some resources on how to journal inside of Spiritual Study Hall. If you're interested in that, you can learn more at queertheology.com/community. Like it's a place to sort of like externalize all of like the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions you're having about sex and shame. It might be like, and like, do this work together in community inside of sex positive spirituality, right? But it also like might be that like some shit is like coming up that is like more intense than like you are able to do on your own, and you like might need to get support from a helping professional, like potentially that's like a sex and relationship coach, like likely that is a psychotherapist of some sort, to really help you like sort of like work through that. And you want to make sure that that is like a queer affirming therapist, a sex positive therapist. Like ideally on their website, they talk about queerness and or kink and or polyamory. Just even if you're not queer and kinky and polyamorous, just to like know that like they've done their work and like their container that they're holding for you is like big enough that you are like not going to run into any of their walls, right? So like it could be that like you really have to do some like therapeutic work. If you it doesn't feel like that big and intense. I think like just like journaling is a big help, and paying attention to like what are you thinking about sex? Like, and what are you in relationships? And like, what are you like wanting more of? And what are you like wanting less of? Or like, what isn't working? Or like, what questions do you have? And then based upon sort of like what comes up from that, this is an unsatisfying answer because like it depends. But like based upon what comes up from that, there's all sorts of like roads you can go down in terms of like getting back in touch with your body, getting back in touch with your desires, putting yourself out there in a dating way, finding ways to have sex, like finding ways for sex education, finding places to experiment. Like it's so that's all going to be kind of personal based upon sort of like what comes up for you. But I think the first step is like figuring out what are the negative stories that you're carrying around, just like specifically, and get those outside of your head. And what questions do you have, and like where do you want to be going, and then getting some support if you need it.
Okay. And then for folks that are like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about my sex life, about my relationships, about my relationship with my body, what could I be doing to make it even better?
Yeah, this is a little like woo, but like I think that like, and I don't, okay, I'm going to say it and then but I don't mean it exactly literally, but I think that you have like an opportunity to be sort of like a sexual missionary of sorts that like, and not in the date to convert, right? Or whatever it was, date to save sort of way. But like, I think that people in general have like lots of like mishy-mashy, weird ass beliefs and attitudes around sex, and especially queer people from like Christian background. And so I think that like if you are able to sort of like really like own your sexuality and like be in tune with that and be able to articulate that in a way that is like not like creepy and predatory, but also not like trying to convert you to Christianity, like evangelism, right? But just sort of like, this is who I am and this is how I move through the world and this is like how I see it to be good, that you can like really like have a really profound impact on other people's lives as well by sort of like modeling this sex positive spirituality. To be like a slut and also a spiritual person, or to be someone who's like deeply monogamous and also spiritual and also not afraid to talk about sex. I'm thinking about that woman who is, she always like you send me her Instagram reels on Instagram. She's like an observant Muslim woman, but she's like talking about how like she's like, I'm a doctor, but like don't come to me with sex questions. Like I've only been with one man. Like you got to get yourself a hoe friend. I have a hoe friend. Like she's like, I forget her hoe friend's name, but she's like
Rachel.
Was it Rachel?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's like, listen, when I got to a hotel room, I'm taking pictures of the shower because I know Rachel has encountered a shower. She will give me tips on position, but like I am not that friend. At some point, she like tagged Rachel into the comments, and so I think like there's like power in this woman being like, I'm like a hijab wearing, like observant, devout Muslim woman, and also like I have sex, and also like just because I have sex this way doesn't mean you have to have sex that way, and celebrating her hoe friend, right? I think that there's like great power in that. So you don't have to like be as slutty as me, right? To be the sort of like beacon of hope and light for folks. But you do have to have sort of like really done that like work for yourself to figure that out. And then also to like sort of continually refine like ways in which you like talk about it with your friends, talk about it with family members, model that sex positive spirituality so that other people can, oh my God, that sounds so evangelical. So that other people can like see that light in you and be like, oh, I want some of that. I mean, like the amount of, I was at a sex party and someone asked me about my work and I was like talking about like my book about polyamory and kink and spirituality. And I think like people are like hungry for it. There's like never been a place where I've been where someone's like, oh, that's weird. And so the more that you can sort of like heal yourself and like not just heal, but sort of like take it to the next level of, and have ways of being able to like live it out and articulate it confidently. And you don't have to have a podcast about it like we do, but like just to be able to work into casual conversation, I think can be like really healing for your like literal people in your neighborhood that you encounter on a daily basis.
Yeah. And I want to add to that like, it's also not just about sex, right? That this is also about your body and your desires, and that like, you might be single and listening to this, or not interested in a relationship, or like sex is fine, but you don't really care about having it more or like whatever. But that there is something really, really vital, I think, in figuring out your body and how to inhabit and embody yourself in ways that are like positive and feel good and aren't shame based. Like the thing for me is like all of the messages about sex that I got were bad enough, but like what they really did was a number on how I felt about being in my body.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I had to heal the messages that I received about sex in order to heal the relationship that I had with my body. Whether or not I like ever wanted to have sex, like it was all intertwined. And so like really want to encourage folks that if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know, like I don't really care about sex that much, or like I feel fine about that, or I'm not having sex right now and like that feels okay, that like this is also in a body thing. And that what you're saying, Brian, about like how you healing those parts of yourself sexually has enabled you to show up in new and different ways. Like, I think that those things are the same with your body, right?
Yes.
Like when you can show up at ease in your own skin in spaces, it like shifts the whole tenor of the room. And like in a time when queer and trans lives are going to continue to be more under attack, like us being able to show up fully embodied and at peace with ourselves is going to be healing, not just for our own community, but for like everyone that we come in contact with. And it's also like vital to the work of doing justice work, right? Like when you show up in a space to be in solidarity with other people, if you've got like weird shit that you're carrying with you, like that's going to come out, which isn't saying that you can't show up for justice until you're fully healed. Like if that were the case, no one would be doing anything anywhere. Like, you know, but it is like an important step of like, of starting to do this work and being aware of where you might still be carrying things as you show up into places. Like all of this is intertwined. It all matters. And it's all really, really important.
Yeah. Oh my God. We could have a whole other episode about just bodies. And like, as we're like a few weeks into the new year, I'm just like so aware of like the way that people talk about their own body. It's often like, at least in my world, like their own body and less about other people's bodies, but just like the way they talk about their bodies in relationship to like movement or exercise or food or size. And it's just like, oh my God, to show up in a space and to like, A, first, like not be activated by that, B, not add to that, and C, be able to like add a countermeasure. Like people are just, especially around the New Year's, like swimming in all sorts of like bullshit around their bodies. And like your body is good and you should take care of it because it's like it's like worth taking care of your body, not because like you have to make it smaller or stronger or whatever. But so also, yeah, there's a whole other related but separate thing around bodies and like the healing work that is needed around bodies in our world. So thank you for flagging that for us, Shay.
And if you want to join us for Sex Positive Spirituality, there is still time to join. We're going to start on Wednesday. You don't have to be there live either. Like you can watch the replays. If you want to know more, go to queertheology.com/sexpositivespirit. Nope. If you want to know more, go to queertheology.com/sexpositive for all of the details. We would love to see you and have you in the cohort.
See you soon.